Three friends boarded Disney's Galactic Starcruiser to seek their destiny and emerged as heroes of the Halcyon. Hi, this is future Drew from the editing booth. I just wanted to welcome you to a special bonus and spoiler-filled episode of Heroes of the Halcyon. Last week, we spoke with immersive narrative designer Nick Tierce about his experiences with the Galactic Starcruiser and several of Disney's earlier experiments with immersive entertainment, such as the alternate reality game The Optimist and Disneyland's Legends of Frontierland and Ghost Post. We also spoke with him about Knott's Berry Farm and their Ghost Town Alive interactive experience that they've had the last several summers. The conversation was about 90 minutes. We covered so much material and went in several different directions as we chatted. We also discussed a number of things in pretty spoilerific ways. So as a result, this bonus episode is essentially the unedited conversation in its entirety. So if you don't want to be spoiled, don't listen to this bonus episode. However, if you don't mind spoilers, or you've already gone on the Galactic Starcruiser, just sit back and enjoy listening. Nick knows his stuff, and as an immersive designer himself, he was able to highlight aspects of these experiences for us in a way that just really blew our mind. It was so much fun.
Good journey, everyone, and welcome to Heroes of the Halcyon, the best and only, as far as we know, Galactic Starcruiser Superfan podcast. I'm Galactic Starcruiser Superfan Christine, and with me are
Superfan Martin
and Superfan Drew.
Today we are so lucky to be talking with Nick Tierce. Nick's an immersive designer, and he's really a renaissance man when it comes to this field. He's worked in immersive theater, alternate reality games, and his latest project is Hollow Medium, which coincidentally can be found at hollowmedium.com. And it's a ghost story that's being told in multiple parts, starts this October, and it's sort of the audio equivalent of a found footage movie. But we had a great conversation with Nick about the most interactive, immersive experience on planet Earth right now. Of course, that's Disney's Galactic Starcruiser. Let's take it away with Nick Tierce.
Well, as we do, we'll start with your love of Star Wars. What is your favorite Star Wars memory?
Ooh, my favorite Star Wars memory. That's a good question. It probably has something to do with Starcruiser, not to get too far ahead of us here. But there are, without spoilers, there are layers to peel back within Starcruiser. And I would say that one of the little meetings that takes place in the cargo hold probably would represent my favorite, let's say a character revealing the connection to their home world was easily one of the things that stands out to me as, God, in the moment, I knew I was never going to forget this. That being said, it's been a life full of Star Wars memories because I kind of grew up with it. I can't remember a time before Star Wars. I was of the prime age right before the prequels came out, and I grew up with my dad's laser discs, watching the original trilogy and having the opportunity to just become obsessed with those even before the special editions came out. And so I was the guy, the new toys hadn't come out yet, so I was, as a kid, rummaging through antique shops. So that actually, maybe that pre-Starcruiser, let's answer this before we, get into the real meat and potatoes of Starcruiser. Probably as a kid, before the new Star Wars toys had come out, digging through antique shops, trying to find a Greedo or this or whatever, because, they weren't in the stores anymore when I was growing up. Right. And so I was just in the prime demographic once the special editions came out, and my friends all suddenly were interested in Star Wars. And then the prequels came out, and I was just hook, line, and sinker. I never was the same. Got into cosplay. I grew up, my father was a prop maker, so I was kind of surrounded by the iconography of science fiction, including Star Wars. So that is something that those childhood memories of just kind of scavenging, being a little Ray myself, scavenging for any legacy pieces of Star Wars I could get.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know for us, there's been a lot of times where hey, we're just going to pop over to Target and see what's up. And several hours later, it's like, we just drove 300 miles today and hit every Target in the state or every Walmart or whatever.
I can relate. The new little, the little micro galaxy collection that has just dropped. I told myself I'm not going to do it, but they hooked me in with these chase variants where it's like, oh, I'm not going to collect these. But if I happen to be at a store and I see, oh, wait, there's a very rare chase variant here. It would be irresponsible of me not to buy this.
Absolutely. It would be irresponsible.
We both agree and understand.
Our entire listenership is like nodding their heads. Yeah.
Yes, that is right.
Oh my! So, what is your favorite Star Wars medium? If we're looking at movies and TV and books, comics, games, toys, everything.
Now, that's a good question because, honest to God, my answer, not just because I'm here, is the immersive medium. And having grown up quite close to Disneyland, the Disney park specific relationship with Star Wars has been kind of an ever-present thing for me as well. And so I've always been drawn to the immersive and the interactive. And if you just asked me there's a new Star Wars thing, what medium would you want it to exist in? Obviously, hope on hope, it would be a physical experience, an immersive experience. And obviously, budgetarily, that is not an easy expectation to make because Rise of the Resistance alone costs 4 times as much as Rise of Skywalker. There's not a frequency with which you can expect new immersive Star Wars to come out. And so if I was to put, say, Starcruiser as the pinnacle of that aside and say, what other than that, I really do enjoy the comics and the video games and digging into kind of the marginalia of the stories. And I love the idea of non-hierarchical storytelling where it's not necessarily just because movies are so expensive or theme parks are so expensive that they're on the top, but you're sort of telling one interwoven tapestry along a transmedia, landscape. That's the dream. And in the best moments of Star Wars, that's what it can be.
That's marvelous.
Yeah.
I've got goosebumps. That's great. And as soon as you said immersive, because no one said immersive yet, I was like, yes.
That's the honest to God truth.
Awesome.
It is, honestly, just the medium I have found myself also working in. So there is a passion on a personal level as a creator, as well as a consumer, which is, look, if there are ways I can experience the properties I've grown up with in this new arena. And, as I said, the tendrils of that has spread throughout. I mean, even the first time I rode Rise of the Resistance, my reaction was, wow, this is Star Trek: The Experience that was in Las Vegas for all those years. The multi-chambered pre-show experience that leads to the ride. They've sort of plussed that idea. And there are always precedents. It's just sometimes you get a project that combines so many precedents that no longer are in the marketplace, like Starcruiser, that you say, wow, there's really not anything to compare it to. Even if you can see the threads, it's still just it stands so alone at the present moment that we're talking.
I love that. And I love the fact that Star Wars, all these different mediums build on each other. I mean, it's the toys. What other franchise or big property we have such a resonant connection to the toys? Yeah.
That is one part of the puzzle that I feel like maybe the current structure at Lucasfilm doesn't appreciate to the level that previous generations did, which is to say it's pretty evident just being on the outside that Hasbro is being given a really rough time figuring out what toys they're allowed to make, when they're allowed to make them, and getting those to market in a way that where you can actually find them. My heart goes out to them because I do hope that it becomes clear that you kind of have to loosen the reins a little bit to allow that to happen. Because like you said, for so many fans like us, the merchandising is part of the storytelling. It's not just this, a way to make money on the fans, even though that's obviously what it is. We want to support the brands that we love. We want them to continue to exist. But, even just the bringing back the little blurbs on the back of the action figures, which don't exist anymore. You turn over a vintage collection figure, it doesn't say anything about the character on it. And I just long for those great days when they were being ambitious with, do you remember the pop out dioramas they used to have on the back of some of the, they used to do little pop out for some of the expanded universe figures. And it was just like a little 3D thing and you could pose. And I feel like in the age of Instagram, bringing back something like that, it would just, enhance your ability to tell new stories. Cause that's, you want to take something you love and look at it. Oh, I saw it in the movie from this angle, but now that I have it, I can look at the underside and I can imagine new things that the movie didn't give me the opportunity to imagine. So yeah, I'm all about how the storytelling bleeds into your life. And what is immersive if that is, it's allowing room for the audience to exist in the fiction. And those are the magic moments you can't, because that's not just a spectacle thing or a narrative. It's specifically carving out your story. It's a story decision to say, we are not going to make a manifest of the names of every passenger on the Halcyon on this specific day. The guests who go visit it, we're giving the reins of that story to them, and it will constantly reinvent itself. Each new cruise the Starcruiser does, that cast of characters changes, and it's that willingness to hand over the authorial power to the audience, which is the scary thing, but also the great promise of immersive. And not every creator is willing to do that. And honestly, if George Lucas, who I love and who we admire, was still in charge, the odds of him being comfortable with that are pretty low, because even in terms of video games, he was a little antsy about some of the stuff that went on. So yeah, I think that we're in this era where it's this type of thing. Only Disney could have made this. And for all the criticism they get, we've got to admire that something on this scale exists at all. Even if it's not quite what every fan imagined, it's just the fact that it exists is a miracle.
That's an understatement. We've often said on this podcast, when we decided we were going to go, several breakfasts, we were like, "Can you believe this is happening? Can you if they even do a tenth of what they say they're going to do? Can you believe this is happening?" And yeah, it's just incredible.
And I kind of can't believe Disney did it first. Yeah. Like honestly, we were kind of on this string of a decade or so where Universal was the ambitious one for a while. Mm-hmm. You know, you had all the preceding decades of, Walt Disney and everything. These things were always ahead of the game. But for a while there, Universal was slightly more limber. And now the tables have kind of turned. And I think we will be seeing a Starcruiser-esque experience from Universal within the next few years. It's inevitable because now the reins have shifted back.
And now I'm was it Embracer IP or whatever, the group that bought Lord of the Rings last week and all the Middle Earth stuff. And there's a big giant expansion pad, and you could just tell Universal just kitchen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if they do an interactive Lord of the Rings thing, then forget about it.
There's a couple franchises that really lend themselves to this.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Some of them are more challenging to imagine exactly what you would do. Like Marvel is not the easiest match that I can think of in terms of where would you want to sleep in the Marvel universe? Are you gonna pay Starcruiser prices to stay in a brownstone, brick walls, and
Right.
Well, if Aunt May's making me breakfast, then yeah.
Fair point. You know what? Sold. You turn me around on that one.
Nice.
So Nick, when was your first Starcruiser voyage?
I was very lucky to have been on the first public voyage. So I wouldn't call it the maiden voyage, because I think they actually explicitly called one of the Make-A-Wish cruises before that the maiden voyage. But the first public opportunity there was, I was lucky enough to assemble some of my fellow datapad builders, because back when Galaxy's Edge opened, we got the crazy idea of making costumes for our phones, which kind of caught on like wildfire. And I was one of my prouder moments to have kicked off that little trend. But we said, okay, guys, let's go all in again. And we had all kind of met each other playing the experiments that led up to Starcruiser. So it's like, how can we not do this together? Which was a great opportunity, because originally it was supposed to be my wife and I, but she had a work conflict that came up the very last minute. So I put out the bat signal and I said, guys, come on, we've got to do this together, which, allowed for the guys who love interactive the most of the people I know to come in and kind of feel the edges of the map and figure out what is the shape of this Starcruiser thing together.
And those folks, had they done, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the what I call the experiments that Disney was doing leading up to Starcruiser.
Yeah.
But you said those folks who went with you, they also were well-versed with some of the stuff that Disney had done?
We didn't even know each other before those experiments. And that's the beauty of it, is that we formed out of an interest specifically in this. And so this kind of represented like the culmination of all that, And so, no, it was a group of three of us that really were knowing what to expect in that sense, but then not knowing what explicitly is this story that they're going to tell. How much of those lessons are they going to incorporate and things of that nature.
That's fascinating. Well, Nick, you've been lucky enough to be on Starcruiser for a second time. Was it as much fun the second time?
I can easily say that the second time I went, we had the quintessential Starcruiser experience, which is great because I actually did hit a few roadblocks the first trip. I fell into, let's say, an unpaved path between a couple of others on Starcruiser, but thankfully, having followed these experiments throughout, I had become friendly with some of the Imagineers, and I was able to tell them pretty much beat by beat what had happened, and they confirmed that they were able to pave over the pothole that I had fallen into. But the second time, it was just completely seamless. It was exactly what I imagined the experience was, and the reason we were able to do it again is when I came back. And I told my wife everything that had happened. She's like, we've got, as soon as possible, you and I have got to go do this. So it was really great. It was the second time we got to do it as intended, just the two of us. And gosh, she became a magnet for the characters in a way that even I, as someone who's experienced with the immersive world, she just really caught the attention of everybody. Because, I had gotten the sense that maybe we had gotten a little nudge from people I had known working on the project, like, hey, Nick's coming again, make sure, this, that, and the other. But beyond even anything that was even possible for them to do with that, she was just becoming friends with all the characters. And so we found so much of, look, I was committed to not doing anything I did the first time. I was committed to saying, okay, I've done that. I didn't get to do the other thing. I'm going to try and do the other thing. But honestly, as I am known to say online so much, that we use certain language when we describe Starcruiser because it's the only thing we have available to us. But even if it's not quite accurate to the literal way the experience is built, which is when we talk about paths or when we talk about tracks, that paints a very straight line in our heads, right? Like, I'm on this path, which means I can't be on this path. But the design doesn't actually work that way. It's kind of node-based where you can go from event to event. And the whole reason that system exists is to make sure that the invitations you get at the end are complementary to what you have seen at the beginning. So it's all this very complex, interwoven, basically cluster of narrative that says, if you've seen this, any of these things are possible, but we're going to determine those based on all these other factors, your affiliation, who you've talked to, all these different things. So you can, for want of a better phrase, mix and match, which we were just like, I became best friends with Wraith Cole that first trip, as many of us have, and the pleasure of helping out with what he's working on. And so I said, I'm not even talking to Wraith Cole. I said, if I see Wraith Cole coming to me, I'm turning the other way and saying, I've danced with you once before, crazy man, but I can never dance with you again. But sure enough, we're on the second day and we have sort of unlocked all of our final invitations. And my wife and I are comparing notes because she's doing something a little different than what I'm doing, which is part of the fun. But we're just sitting in the atrium and Wraith and Gaia walk up to us and say, we think we can trust you. And there's something we need your help with. And we need you to meet us in the cargo hold down at this time. Nothing to do with any of the datapad invitations we've gotten, but it just so happened on that trip, engagement percentages were pretty low, which meant that even within the now reduced capacity of what they were inviting people down into the cargo hold to do, they had a bunch of open slots. And they're like, okay, look, these guys are going crazy on this other corner. Let's get them down there and have a good time.
Wow.
And it's amazing because truthfully, of the few kind of differences I noticed between the two trips and kind of the adjustments they had been making, when I originally went down to that meeting in the cargo hold, that we all know what I'm talking about here, there was a lot of people the first time. And when I went the second time, even with Wraith roping people in, there was like 6 people down there.
Oh my God.
So I'll be very curious. I'll be very curious to hear from yours, because your second trip is coming up, yes?
Yes, October.
I will be very curious to hear from you what sort of capacity differences you notice, because, there are certain moments that you would imagine would be more effective with a smaller group.
Yeah.
And they can't possibly predict every cruise. It's going to be 200 or 300 different people. What are they going to be interested in? We have assumptions as designers inherited from video games and other comparable experiences. Like, look, if you present a good affiliation and a bad affiliation, in the grand total of existence, you can kind of expect about 70% of people are going to go the good way, and about 30% are going to go the bad way. But as I've been witnessing just from the social posts and watching people on Starcruiser, unless you have an extremely charming Lieutenant Croy and you suddenly have so much interest in a quote unquote pathway, or let's just say association with a particular character,
right,
that is greater than even it seems from the outside was planned for that character. So if I can imagine in the future, giving Croy a little bit more to bestow upon the players, just because who could have predicted that Croy would be such a breakout, hysterical character, like just brilliant. Yeah.
I did not see that coming. I mean, I had heard about the smuggler characters but the Croy absolutely floored me. Just how quick, how clever. And again, you love this guy and you love to hate this guy. And
and he loves that you love to hate him.
And you love that he loves that you.
And just the layers of what you learn about his personality and his sort of Gaia fascination, and just peeling back the layers of this. He's arch and he's camp, which is part of the fun, but there's also these other aspects to him. And you get to see that through the actions the character takes on board, which is just, really satisfying. So, who knows what the future of this experience is, but man, yes, you could do whole alternate stories if you wanted to, but part of me is like, yeah, eventually, but I could see an alternate path to that, which is not necessarily changing the story, but deepening the story. Meaning, for those of us who have been many times, unlocking perhaps a Cruise 2 or Cruise 3 exclusive set of sub opportunities, which are like, look, I recognize, even if you don't have to break the fiction of it. You don't have to have Croy say to you, you've been on the Halcyon before, but he can say, I feel that you are an astute companion that has much experience helping the First Order. You must help me with a special opportunity. You know what I mean? Like just things like this, because that was always sort of my view on Galaxy's Edge, which is, obviously we're having a different conversation now that Galaxy's Edge out here in West Coast now has some very confusing 10-minute intervals where ghosts of the past walk around.
Right, yes.
But in general, this idea of Galaxy's Edge taking place on one very specific day, I always thought, you could, the way you can change this is you can change the day. That's the obvious choice. But also, you can just, like a faceted crystal, just turn it that day another direction and look at it from another perspective and say, this is a bustling outpost. There are many things happening on this day. And as the years peel back the layers of that, you will learn more about the things that happen to this day. So it's more of a perspective shift than a narrative shift. Now, that being said, that is a very aspirational sentence I just said. And the presence of Boba Fett on Batuu does not make me think they're going to be moving in that direction specifically, but it's all up in the air. Who knows what's to come for
maybe not on the West Coast, but in Batuu East, maybe we'll see.
Maybe.
But that's
exactly. Cool. Why not? Why not make East and West as different as possible? That would be great.
We've actually said that. When it was first announced, we actually kind of figured that it would be different planets for East Coast and West Coast. And
I didn't know.
They didn't say that.
Well, I know they
were
didn't say that, but I didn't know you guys talked about that.
We were like, shouldn't it be like a different locale with a bunch of shared assets?
Right.
Just so they could double the storytelling.
Yeah, I could definitely see a world where it was Black Spire Outpost, but it was literally just a continuous, there's a 2,000-mile gap between the two sides of the outpost. But, it's not inconceivable that any outpost would have two different cantinas.
Sure.
Oga's cantina and one owned by someone else.
Right.
It seems within the realm of possibility, but also Galaxy's Edge was already so prohibitively expensive that would have obviously doubled the design cost if it would have not done anything to the build cost. But,
and you can't amortize it. That's one of the benefits of building two instead of just one. You can amortize a little bit differently. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's stunning how close together they each are. How similar. I mean, you can blindfold me and I can walk through Florida because I've walked through California so much.
Sure.
Unless you're in the forest, in which case you'll hit a tree.
Yes. Well, Nick, when did you actually become first aware that Galactic Starcruiser, it didn't have a name at that time, but when did you first become aware that this was a thing?
So I knew something was cooking because obviously, this being my friend group's particular area of interest, I kind of met them playing a game in 2013 called The Optimist, which was tied into the Tomorrowland film, although at the time, Disney didn't admit that. And honestly, Disney never officially admitted that. It was simply 2 years before that film came out, a 6-week alternate reality game experience that took place all over Southern California. Anywhere Walt Disney was historically known to have hung out, they installed a fictional clue that implied that he was part of the secret society of geniuses. And so over the course of the 6 weeks, that took us through LA and D23 Expo and Disneyland itself. And there's no faster way to build community than with an immersive experience like this, because everyone's doing something they've never done before. And it's like the beauty of this medium, and this extends from that all the way through to Starcruiser, is we're used to storytelling being told to us. But the beauty of this medium is you can take a story and splice it up and distribute the evidence of a story having happened, in this case, over the real world or a physical space that you control. And the assembly of that story is part of the experience of it. And so it's not the storyteller telling the audience the story, it's the audience telling the story to themselves.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so there is an ownership, a deep spiritual ownership that comes with piecing together a story by saying, hey, you were just in bridge training and you talked to a different character than I did. Who was on the screen when you were in bridge training? Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Oh, and you start to realize that Starcruiser is structured as this kind of baton passing, where with a very one singular exception, the scenes don't repeat. It really is mechanical repetition, but narrative propulsion. And so you're pushing the story forward at all times, and you're passing the baton to the next group of guests. Like, I did this in engineering. Now you're going to go in engineering and do the next step of that. And the collaborative aspect of it is something you really can't get in any other medium. So we formed playing that game in 2013. And then after that, became familiar with some of the Imagineers working on it that had been kind of brought in from outside Disney as sort of, a perspective on what the rest of the industry had been doing in this space for the decades prior. And so those Imagineers kind of became our rock stars. So the thing I always go back to with Starcruiser is the best analogy I can come up with was, why is this so important to you? Is it's like, okay, if you're a music fan, it's like if your favorite band doesn't just release a new album, they've invented a new way to listen to music. How excited would you be in that situation, right? And so these Imagineers are our rock stars. And so you become friendly with them and just seeing kind of what sort of research trips they start going on. And you're like, oh, some of these Imagineers are being sent on German LARPs for Battlestar Galactica, overnight sleepover Nordic LARPs for not Harry Potter experiences that have you sleeping in a castle, and multi-day adventures of all different kinds. And I'm like, that's not random research. That's specific research. And so, even before Galaxy's Edge, I had an inkling that they would want to do something in this space. And obviously with Galaxy's Edge, you kind of get more details on what that might be. And the names start to congeal. And even like a year before Starcruiser opens, they added new voicemails that this is the craziest one. They add these spam phone calls that the Zabaka in the toy shop in Galaxy's Edge, she's getting these phone calls while you're in her shop. Her little silhouette on the screen there. And one of them says, "You've just won a trip on board the Halcyon." And she's like, "Stop calling me." And she hangs up. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because I remembered that name from the notice board in Oga's. They had put up an Arabesh thing for now hiring the Halcyon. And I'm like, all right. I think that's probably what the ship is called. But, the experience didn't have a name yet. And it was just like kind of knowing this coming storm was on the horizon, kind of mixed in with the rumors about Galaxy's Edge, but knowing that, look, fundamentally, and this is my one big soapbox about Starcruiser, is there's this narrative that gets out there. Forget even all of the negative stuff about it, but even for people who love Starcruiser, that's like, Starcruiser is just, it's a paywall behind stuff we were supposed to get for Galaxy's Edge. And I think that is fundamentally untrue, because the type of interactive design you can do in a Starcruiser-like space has very little to nothing to do with the type of interactivity you can do in a theme park space with an indeterminate number of guests,
right?
Constant flow. And quite frankly, it's just the things you do on Starcruiser have nothing to do with the things that we know were planned for Galaxy's Edge and got cut. They're just different types of interactivity, but they both fall under the umbrella of interactivity. So I see why people make that connection. Sure. But ultimately, no, these things were developed in tandem, and they were always meant to complement each other, but not to be like, look, there's not an equivalent of the things that we lost in Galaxy's Edge still to this day. And Starcruiser doesn't change that one way or another. But that kind of fed into, the type of play that I expected from what would be the next experiment, which was the Legends of Frontierland. Now, they did that for 2 different years. One was just in the Golden Horseshoe, and then one spread out to the streets of Frontierland. That was the one that I was really involved with.
Okay.
But we just found out recently that first Golden Horseshoe version of Legends of Frontierland was designed as a pre-Galaxy's Edge Star Wars concept test for a Sabacc/Cantina experience that was going to be installed in the Innovations building in Disneyland, what became the launch bay.
Oh, wow.
Star Wars launch bay. So that was going to be a standalone immersive thing before the green light had been given to this thing that would be Galaxy's Edge. And then obviously the lessons blossomed from there. It's just so funny to me that like even the explicit things that some of the Imagineers like Asa Kalama, who was so involved with Legends of Frontierland, you'd talk to him after Legends and it's like, well, what are the lessons learned? And he's like, well, economies are very hard in theme parks, like because we would give people, bits and wooden nickels, then they would buy things. And then this whole economy cropped up and just got out of their hands. And they're like, well, we're not doing that again. And then of course, Galaxy's Edge come out, I fire up the data pad and it's like credits. And I'm like, oh, so I don't know how hard that lesson was learned. But I do sense that in the coming months, especially with the Batu Bounty Hunters coming to West a lot sooner than we thought it was, and sort of a couple of new apps that are going to be tied into Play Disney Parks. I do think some of the complaints people have about not being able to spend your credits on anything are going to be alleviated pretty soon. Not in the way we might have expected, but I get the sense that something like that is coming soon.
So when they announced Starcruiser, were you pretty much, now all the pieces, they're all falling into place?
Yeah, no kidding. That was exactly the moment where I was like, they did it. I can't believe they did it. This is an unbelievable, success just to get the green light. I mean, and I've heard some of the stories of what it took to get that green light. And it is a Herculean task to get, because this started to be pitched before Chapek took over, so they had to pitch to Iger. And, people at that level aren't necessarily as interested in immersive as the 4 of us sitting here are.
Right.
And something this radical takes a lot of convincing. So the fact that the pitch was convincing enough and the design was robust enough that they initiated the who you would think is not able to be initiated to share that vision. It's really an amazing thing. And honestly, for Star Wars, forget Disney, for Star Wars, it kind of leapfrogged over a step that a lot of other franchises take, which is this isn't just the first Star Wars immersive. This is the first Star Wars theatrical, which is to say you have something like Harry Potter that goes to Broadway and say, look, we're going to go into this new thing where a lot of fans have pictures of certain actors in their heads for certain characters. But when you go onto the theatrical live stage, it's naturally assumed that Hamlet will be played by 400 different people. This comes with the territory. And what I love about that and what it's done for Star Wars, particularly for this, we piggybacked over Luke Skywalker doing a black box theater and one-man show, which is what I've been wanting for, years.
I think the play would be called Daddy Issues, if I had to guess.
Well, he's got a lot of meditation time on Octo. He could reflect on a lot of things.
Yes.
But the idea of now a set of characters, both legacy and, to my personal delight, brand new characters on Starcruiser, you have made a new fandom niche on the internet, which, like Broadway fandom, is forced into the track of focusing on a character's qualities rather than an actor's qualities, and saying it is baked into the DNA of these characters that they will look different to different people, which to me just makes you focus on what matters about a character, which is the given circumstances of their existence and kind of what you can assume based on that. So that's just a supreme joy for me. And I hope this isn't the last theatrical thing. I'd be open for non-immersive theatrical productions that are in the Star Wars universe because it's so vast and they don't have to be this giant spectacle. They can be personal and intimate because I think, look, they built an amazing thing with Starcruiser. But when I talk to people like you folks who love it, what are the things we remember? We generally aren't talking about the showdown at the end. We're talking about I got pulled aside and someone whispered in my ear, or a character put their hand on my shoulder, or they entrusted me with something. And that is a big thing. Like, there's not just story and personal implications to that. There are design implications for letting that happen. I still have huge questions about things on Starcruiser that, look, I'm following pretty close on social media to read people's experiences because I just love it. But I think there are scenes that have been planned for that have not yet occurred on Starcruiser.
Wow.
And I know this is a non-spoiler podcast, so I won't get into too much specifics. But part of that project that we're invited to do with Wraith Cole, he will often assign a right-hand man to be right there with you. Oh, I need your help especially. And he gives something very important to that right-hand man. And then there's a conflict where a moral decision needs to be made. Do I hand it over to the authorities, or do I help this man who's asked for my trust? And obviously, the stakes are stacked so that you will help Wraith Cole. But I think they probably plan something if you betray Wraith Cole. And I would very much like to know what happens if Captain Kevin receives something.
Oh,
no one has ever known.
I know.
And as a small aside to that, like I said, I had no plans of helping Wraith the second time.
Sure, yeah.
But I was there to see it because I was helping, but on the sidelines, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was very curious, who would Wraith select as his right-hand man? And it was this teenage boy who was really into it, right? But didn't really understand the magnitude of what was happening. So when we were heading for the thing to happen, against my better judgment, I didn't break the fourth wall, but in character, in universe, I said to him, there are things that happen all the time on the Halcyon, and you're about to have an opportunity to do something no one's ever done on the Halcyon, just so you're aware. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but be aware. And the funniest thing that's ever happened on the Halcyon happened, which is the thing occurs, everyone's celebrating. Wraith looks to me and says, "Where's my right-hand man?" And I, with stark white face, respond to Wraith, "He went to bridge training." So in the middle of this story beat, this kid realized, oh, I'm scheduled for, so he puts the thing in his pocket and walks into bridge training. and Wraith just kind of looks at me, understanding what I've just said, and him acknowledging that I knew that wasn't supposed to happen. And he said, "That's never happened before. I'll have to take care of this. Don't worry. Meet me back down in the cargo hold. I will take care of this." And when at the end of the show, when technically the story's over, but the characters are still in character, I went up to Wraith and I said, "Well, that was interesting, wasn't it?" And he said, he relayed to me that the second surprising occurrence of that was when he had to then, as Wraith, go into the bridge training when a different scene is occurring. And the look on the other character's face who's running bridge training, like, "What are you doing in here?" He's like, "Oh, I just need to have a conversation with this kid real quick."
just a moment. I just need to talk to this gentleman here. Oh my Lanta, that I will have to put a spoiler warning in front of this, but and you have to understand, Nick, Christine and I might burst into tears on occasion, and it's mainly because just the excitement. Obviously, your enthusiasm for this is perhaps the only one that I've met that's maybe at our level or beyond. So
the Gaia storyline is sensational.
I'm freaking out right now.
Yeah.
That is, oh my God.
Yeah. Can you? And I never thought of the Kevin thing either. So that would be just unbelievable.
Well, what's crazy is we had a little teeny moment ourselves where it was Wraith Cole. I'm not going to say he broke the fourth wall, but we saw just a sliver. But he broke the fourth wall
to you specifically,
but in character.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of it. That's the dance.
Yeah.
It was the dance. He broke the fourth wall, but still maintained character, and it was just such magic. Like you couldn't recreate that gumbo ever again.
No, absolutely not. and real, which Wraith was it? I'm just curious. Which the
So that time it was Jason Keller.
Oh, it was okay.
All
right, okay.
Is that that's his name?
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Yes,
I know the guy you're talking about. Yeah.
So that was that different from the Wraith that I had the first time.
Did you have Joe Rody Wraith the first time?
That is correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yeah, we call it Joe Rody Wraith, and then the younger guy, the guy
the
who
one
played
I would just
Gaston.
love to have, the one who I see almost nobody post pictures with, but like I remember, because that's the weird part of this is after that trip, I wasn't expecting any kind of reaction, but a lot of the performers followed me on social.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I didn't go looking for them. They kind of found me. And so to see like, say, the 5 guys who play Wraith all lined up together. And I'm like, that dude looks like Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski. I want to see that Wraith.
Yep. And I think that's who we had.
That's who we had.
Yeah.
Magnificent.
That's so good.
Love. Yeah.
I had so put the Wraith thing out of my mind for that second cruise that at the very beginning during muster, I had completely forgotten about that whole interaction where basically if you poke around before muster and Wraith might give you a phrase to say to him. I had completely forgotten about that. Some guy, another passenger, a fellow passenger, walks up to me and says that phrase, thinking I was Wraith.
Oh, that's cool. Nice.
On the second trip. And I was like, I thought I knew what he was saying. So I just wanting to improv, I answered in character. And then I was like, oh, wait, no. It clicked in my head that, that's the Wraith key phrase. No, wait, no. That's not me. I'm not him. Yeah, you're looking for somebody else.
Well, Nick, digging into your Instagram and your Twitter feed, we see a long time fascination with Disney and their early experiments with alternate reality games and interactive experiences.
Like the ones we've been talking about, right?
Right.
What's your history with these?
Well, I think it's something I'm always looking for. It's the type of thing that I wish existed in a theme park. Right. And so when those experiments we've been talking about came around, I was just like, this is it. Boom. This is my thing. I'm going to participate to the deepest level that I possibly can. And when you get down to that level, you find your fellow people, you find your brethren, you find the ones who are interested in the same stuff that you are. And that it just felt like these little drops that led to Starcruiser, from the Optimist to the Legends of Frontierland to what I would consider the next installation being Ghost Post, which was originally just considered to be a subscription box with a story, that you would unlock through an app and this kind of thing. Little did we know at the time there was an in-park component that, quite frankly, was the next step in the evolution of the Bluetooth beacon technology that would then be installed after that in Galaxy's Edge. And all of these things were already installed in Disneyland for a previous experiment that was not public. So all the things I'm talking about were public. But I've talked to a few players who are like, oh, no, a couple of years before that, I did this thing called Disney Kudos, which was this purely internal experiment of an app before even smartphones were necessarily as ubiquitous as they are. But the idea of going to physical locations in the park, using your phone to trigger a physical effect, using it to have some kind of story experience. And so those were repurposed for this Ghost Post thing, which was just the most amazing experiment. It didn't always work and it was a little shaky, but it was a stepping stone. And it gave you alternate audio that only your buggy would hear on the Haunted Mansion, which to me was just the most unbelievable thing, impossible.
Yeah.
Something that hasn't even really been followed up on, even though you could do that on Smuggler's Run. The technology is there for that. But whether they will one day remains to be seen. But that really was the thing where I'm like, gosh, you could just see the shining city on the horizon. Like you knew something like this was coming. And so having that culminate in something like this has just been so satisfying to see roll out, even despite the kind of extreme public backlash at the very beginning, before people even knew what it was. It was very hard to watch from the sidelines, kind of knowing some of the personalities behind the design and being like, God, you guys just don't know what it is. But I think Disney's hands were tied. It's like, it wasn't their fault that people were calling it something it wasn't. Like they never called it the hotel.
Right.
No, ever. And so how do you correct people? It's really not even something you can do. You just kind of have to ride that wave. And I think we're still kind of seeing the fallout of that to a certain degree. But I still think back fondly to those things that really built friendships, those experiments that so clearly, not just in the ways we've described with Legends and the economy and these different types of things, but some of the stuff that ended up not being in Galaxy's Edge, there is almost kind of a direct correlation to the things. Like, for example, Legends of Frontierland had a land acquisition game where you were buying the deeds to that plot of land and whatnot. And even though thematically it's quite different, functionally it is the same as the Outpost Control, that you hack different panels for different teams. Oh, I'm on Team Red, you're on Team Blue. Mm-hmm. You're hacking the panel for this and that. Now, that is obviously still active in Disneyland. Now, I say that, but as we currently speak, the version in Disneyland has been turned off because they're working on Batu Bounty Hunters.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
But the thing we didn't get isn't that, because we did get that. What we didn't get was what that was supposed to plug into. That was supposed to plug into the land-wide immersive experience that kind of is there, kind of isn't there to a certain degree. And there was supposed to be basically a central shop that would have been the kind of role play hub, the Explorer shop. And there was going to be a holographic map on the ceiling that would have displayed the live status of the land game. Like, who's winning? First Order, Resistance.
Nice.
And that's where you could have purchased provisions for your role play and things of that nature. Some stuff that ended up, being sold at other shops. But that was, sadly, one of many things that ended up getting cut, not broadly just because of budget cuts. That's kind of what people assume about Galaxy's Edge, just budget cuts. Sadly, it was because Rise of the Resistance went so grotesquely over budget that not only did it kill that, it killed the 2 other missions on Smuggler's Run. So those were casualties of Rise of the Resistance. And Rise of the Resistance is fine, but obviously for me as an interactive guy, it doesn't feel like an even trade necessarily. I would personally give up the amble through the gray hallways to have the immersive adventure on the streets of Batu, because that's the stuff I love. It takes me back to being a pretend cowboy on the streets of Frontierland and all of these things. But yeah, that's kind of my history with it, where it's just been an extreme fascination to the point that it kind of bled into my professional life. And I have had the pleasure myself of being given the opportunity to design a multi-day adventure that took place on the streets of the actual New Orleans.
Oh, wow.
So, it was not necessarily a sleepaway camp. We did not offer bunks to the players, but people who were already in town for a film festival were able to do the types of things you do on Starcruiser with actors that we had spread throughout the city. So you had to walk from location to location to get to the next story beat. So those kinds of things I was kind of stewing on even before Starcruiser opened. And it's just so heartwarming to see it be so embraced by the fans. Because you've got the naysayers, but for the most part, after someone comes off that ship, it's like they've been shown the face of God. It's like, and that's, here's the only difference with me, and the only difference offered to me by having experience with those things is I was not surprised by that at all, because I had lived that. I had been shown the future, but not given the opportunity to play in that future. I'd be allowed to play for 6 weeks here and a month here, but the idea of a dedicated space that exists solely for play, I knew the emotional impact that could have because I'd had it. And I had, to a certain degree, curated it for players on the other end as well. So that is the promise of this, because it is a medium that comes with the fidelity of life. The resolution of a film is limited to the number of pixels on the screen, but the immersive inherits both the inequities and the opportunities of depth of reality, which means, sadly, if you're a player who comes into Starcruiser thinking you're going to aim for a specific outcome, life don't work that way. That's not how real life works. And that's not how Starcruiser works, because there are greater forces at play. Now, in life, the forces are different than in Starcruiser, where the forces are just the limits of that many people needing to have appropriate story moments served to them by this story engine behind the scenes that is trying to calculate so many factors. It's not simply a factor of what does the player want to do. It's a factor of, well, what is the player shown that their allegiance is? But your allegiance, First Order, it's sort of a binary allegiance. Are you helping the First Order? Are you helping the Resistance? That is one factor among many that will determine what is the most appropriate scene for you to be given. And that is just a huge task from a design perspective. And there are other LARP experiences that have tried to use technology in this way, but I still hold that particularly in America, there's never been anything like this that has tried to use technology to this extreme level of curation. And I'm just so glad, and I can't wait to see what happens next, or what creativity does this inspire in people,
the bar's been. Let's go over that bar. Let's see what's next. Yeah.
Well, this won't make it. This will get cut.
Right.
Something that you said that kind of, what an incredible swing it was to not have a whole bunch of established characters on Starcruiser. It is almost all new. That would have been
it's completely
thing
with a few exceptions. With a few exceptions, it's all new. And that to me is the same brilliance of the decision to do a totally original planet for the land, which is just it's the type of decision that is so in my wheelhouse of what I think is right. I would never believe they could get away with it.
Yeah.
And the fact that they did, I was just like, that is such a stroke of genius to give a clean palette for everyone. And honestly, to have a land that is not limited by, look, when I hear people say Galaxy's Edge should have been an established planet, I'm like, what planet do you want to go to? Look, so you just want the cantina and the streets, and you can't have any of the other stuff from Mos Espa. Like if you do Mos Espa, you're limited to scum and villainy, essentially. Like you can't have the other aspects of the Star Wars story. Like you can't try and tell me that Savi has a workshop in Mos Eisley. That's just not, it doesn't make sense. Like you can't have that, or else Luke's story makes no sense. You know, like, oh, there was a lightsaber shop down the street from Luke. He just never popped in there. It's like, no, the fact that you can create a planet that now represents what Star Wars is to a broad spectrum of people, that was genius. You know, that was a choice that is so profoundly complementary to what theme parks do and what they can be, that I can't take people seriously when they're like, it should have been Hoth? So it's all indoors?
Right.
So it's a completely indoor land? Okay, I guess. Oh, throw some snow at me. I guess I went in that little frozen Arendelle thing they did. But I don't know.
You've mentioned Legend of Frontierland a few times, and that's something that I am fascinated with. I never got the opportunity to experience a Legend of Frontierland. Can you tell our listeners who might not be familiar with this about what Legend of Frontierland was like?
Legends of Frontierland was a pretty remarkable experiment because I almost feel like they'll never do anything like that again. And the closest equivalent I can think of in Starcruiser terms is the type of play you do in the atrium, which is to say, characters asking big groups of people for help with the task. We need to sneak this person from here to there. That was all happening on the streets of Frontierland, but the experience was not designed to be that at all. The experience was designed to focus on that land acquisition game and earning your bits to go buy a deed for this plot and that kind of thing. But the fact that game was being conveyed to the players through these live actors who were given the freedom to improv, all the players cared about were the characters. And so we all gravitated towards these characters. So there was a wedding every day. We were getting characters hitched. We were organizing, send a love note to this person. And the wonderful aspect that I always go back to, which there is and isn't an equivalent in terms of Starcruiser, is they created a fictional construct to mask the game master, which was running it each day, under what they would say, I need to go send a telegram to Chicago. And they had an actual telegram stand that they had built, and they would get a physical printout with the game master's instructions. News from Chicago. This has happened. Blah, 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 blah. We need to do this. You need to get people to do this. All these types of things. And so it was just these day-long things that slowly became, and here's the big difference, which Galaxy's Edge made a probably wise decision not to emulate. It was a perpetual story, meaning it took place over the entire summer, meaning if you came the second day, the characters would remember you, and it would build on what you knew from before. And it was this ongoing feud between the Rainbow Ridge folks and the Frontierland folks, and who was going to control the street and all that. Now, that is something that I think would be wonderful in a persistent theme park space, but I certainly understand why it would have presented a huge challenge for Galaxy's Edge or Starcruiser. Now, I will say it does create a little bit of a Westworld type daily reset, right?
Yes.
And it can be a little disconcerting. Now, obviously, if you go to Starcruiser a second time and it's a different actor, you're like, oh, great, kind of a blank slate. This is a different version of the same character. But let me tell you, if you see the same Sandro and you have a really deep connection with the Sandro from your first trip, and it's the same one there, and then he can't remember you, meaning he's not allowed to remember you. There's a weird dissonance there, right? But it's a completely necessary one. And like I said, I probably spent a little too much time with Sandro on that first trip. So I was actively like, I'm not going to go talk to him. I'm going to let other people help him. I'm going to let other people participate in that story. But the man just found me. Like it was just, and so I very gently tried to make it more about, well, this is my wife, you should talk to her, this kind of thing. I would try and pawn him off on other people. But I will say, even within that, Going back the second time, I found new moments with him. I uncovered new nuances of his character. I ran into him at different times than when I ran into him before. And I know this is not specifically like a tips and tricks episode of your podcast, but the biggest tip for me from someone who went once and then pretty soon after went a second time, if you're going to return to the Starcruiser with an interest in seeing different things, the most important thing, do whatever you can to get the opposite dinner seating of what you got the first time. So good. I'm so glad you guys did that, because it will instantaneously, both on the back end and just in your experience, front load new access to things that you didn't have access to before. And sadly, I was not able to get the second dinner seating. So I had to try a little bit harder to see some of the other things that I wanted to see. But I would certainly recommend to anyone, because, again, the two dinners are technically the same, but different story things happen at the dinners. And so you want to see those different scenes. And just like how I have to laugh sometimes when I see people so panicked before their trip about, oh, is this a good bridge training time? And it's like, look, every bridge training has a different story. You're going to see something no one else sees every time you go to that bridge. And you can't, unless you really want to try and map out the spreadsheets, you're not going to have a way to guess which one you're going to get. So I'd say lean into whichever one you get and be like, man, and share it with your friends. Talk to them about it. The people you meet on the ship who weren't there, the half of the fun of this thing is comparing those notes. Use that as an opportunity to be like, well, I saw something you didn't. You saw something I didn't. So that has been something that I keep in mind, especially when I'm having conversations with people about going back. It's such, there's just always something going on. And don't you want to see as many different things as possible?
Okay, so for anybody who's not familiar, can you explain what Ghost Town Alive is at Knott's Berry Farm?
Yeah, absolutely. Ghost Town Alive is fantastic. It's the spiritual successor to Legends of Frontierland, which was actually designed by Imagineers who worked on Legends of Frontierland and then went over to Knott's. Particularly Ken Parks of the entertainment division, not necessarily the interactive portion, but the actor person who curated that part of the experience. And it's been going for several summers now. And it's just the most amazing thing. Honestly, I will say this. Outside of Starcruiser, it's the closest to Starcruiser you can get for that character interactivity, because it is a Western story that takes place over 8 or 9 hours. And so you are given tasks and missions and things to run and help. And you can go in as deep as you want. Now, I will say there is not the technological component. So there isn't like mission tracking and this kind of thing that is offered by the data pad. But it's one of these things where you might not be able to go as deep, but there's more to do. There are more characters. And certainly this summer in particular, there was maybe double the amount of characters there was before the pandemic. Like, there are so many characters that you can get involved with and be, oh, who do you work for? What's your thing? And the aspect of that, which is totally unique and hasn't been really replicated anywhere else, that I loved, it was something that carried over from the design of Legends of Frontierland, is actors in that experience are not playing a named role. I mean, they are. The character has a name, but what I mean is there's no double casting.
Oh, okay.
It means you are cast as you, and if you're not there on a day, the story doesn't involve that character.
That's cool.
And so you are part of the Mayfield gang. There's 8 brothers.
Okay.
It's like,
nice. That's smart.
it's like 4 of them will be there that day.
Oh,
we
cool.
just don't know which ones are there that day. And it allows for this great ongoing persistent storytelling where it's like that person is that character. And I just loved that. It was such an elegant design decision and something that kind of only they could do, because it's like, there isn't this question of canon or the ongoing story, because they only exist to give you opportunities to feel like you're in the Old West. Oh, you're helping the guy who runs the newspaper. You're helping the guy who runs the blacksmith shop. You're helping the guy who, is down there at the elixirs, whatever. It's like there's all these different things. And I'm just shocked at the breadth of the whole thing. I would certainly love for there to be more game design as things go on. And honestly, if anyone from Knott's is listening, I've been trying to reach out to you guys. I would love to collaborate with you on deepening that experience for people, especially like the annual pass holders who come back multiple times. You want to have, they've done a little bit of gamification, but man, for me, they've got the perfect platform to have some really complex missions, multi-step, multi-phase missions. But yeah, I can't say enough good about Ghost Town Alive. And I know it's even been mounted at some of the other parks that Cedar Fair owns, kind of smaller versions of it to see how it can travel, So I think they know how magical what they have is. And man, I can just see them going in all different directions with that. So no, I highly recommend that experience.
Have you been to, obviously you said it's bigger than the last time, so you've gone a couple times. Have you gone every year since you're in the area?
I believe, yes, some years I've been able to play a little more than others, but I believe each year that it's been running, I have at least been able to poke my head in and see what they're doing. Yeah.
Do you see the progression that they're doing as they learn new things and they kick the tires in the medium to see what they could do?
Particularly the actors, they know what works with the players. That's the thing. They know what ropes people in, and they can really feel comfortable in their characters. Overall, design-wise, it hasn't changed too much other than being scaled up. So it's not as if there actually might be a few less interactive layers in terms of puzzles and things that they've done. They've kind of done some meta puzzles in the past that have gone throughout the length of the experience. But it's just a matter of figuring out what works in the sense of how much work did it take us to install versus how many players are actually interacting with this thing. So no, it's one of these things where I'm just so in awe of it, because if you can keep scaling it up, I mean, that to me is, once you reach a critical mass of it, feels like there's this living town of actors and you can go in and interact with them. It's unprecedented.
So in your estimation for Ghost Town Alive, how many people are there to interact with the actors? Because I'm picturing, on Starcruiser, there's, 300-ish people. And that's a pretty small group to be able to manage. But I'm picturing a theme park and having thousands of people walking through an area where they're trying to perform, and how challenging that would be. So how many people...
It is a challenge.
Yeah.
No, I would say that it's, in terms of actual active participants, I would say percentage-wise, you see the same type of split you see on Starcruiser, at least the 2 times I went, which is there are some people who are really into it, and then there are some people who are like, I just kind of want to see the story happen, and I don't want to really participate in all that. And so I think you have that split. So I would say there's probably slightly more in total, but the percentage-wise, you're going to see the same kind of clusters of people around a character, but they can afford to do a lot more because they have more actors. So everyone's not kind of clumped around Croy. You have that kind of spread out. But there are, and it's different day to day, depending on how busy the park is, who's interested in what. But you could have, nobody helping out the newspaper guy, or you could have 10 people, you could have 20 people, but that's happening simultaneously with someone over at the bank or with the mayor or with this kind of thing. And so you've just got a lot more stuff for them to do, and it's distributed over a larger physical space. So yeah, there can be some choke points like around City Hall where particularly they're trying to gather a crowd. So the answer to your question is they incorporate it into the story, which is canonically in this thing you're experiencing, that character is dealing with a crowd. And so he goes into crowd mode, and he's now tasked with making sure the people who just want to get over to Montezuma's Revenge can just walk through.
Nice. That's good.
That's awesome.
We all love Galactic Starcruiser, but if you had a magic wand and unlimited Disney funding, what change would you like to make to Galactic Starcruiser?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is simply a couple of the things that didn't make it in. Because look, every project has a budget. Every project has a box they need to fit in. And I think Starcruiser was just so brilliant in the choices they made to deal with that. And I love the decisions they made, but I would also like to see some of those designs that say were shown in the Art of Galaxy's Edge book when they had that. So the Jake droid, the roaming Jake droid, which showed up in the merchandise. I mean, part of my own personal collection is I love merchandise based on deleted scenes. And if there's a character in a deleted scene who gets an action figure, oh, I love it. That because it shouldn't be merchandise at all. It was deleted. But to have a little Jake pin, that was probably my favorite thing from Starcruiser. So I would love to see Jake roaming around because he used to roam around Disneyland a little bit. And in that same vein, there was supposed to be a physical Rex droid driving the transport down to Batuu, which you see the little picture on the plaque and you hear the voice, but it was supposed to be like, in Rise of the Resistance with the ITS, how you have the Beck up at the front there. There was supposed to be that. So I would love to have that sort of amping up the experience of going down on the transport and everything. And honestly, in the interest of giving people who come multiple times, or even people who are doing Starcruiser for the first time, but don't necessarily want to go off the ship, giving some alternate missions you can do not on the planet that would fulfill the same function as the ones you do on the planet, meaning totally original, totally new stories. But it's like, if you want to help characters by staying on the ship and hacking terminals up there, you don't even need to go down to Batuu. Because like, I don't know about you, but when I went on a ship, I did not want to go down to that planet. I was like, please let me stay. I want to spend every second on this ship that I possibly can. I've been to Batuu 100 times. Like it's great. And I'm glad I could like do slightly different things. But honestly, nothing you do on missions down on Batuu is materially different than the things you can do on the data pad all the time. Like they're exclusive. And so that's cool. I'm glad I did that. But honestly, it's kind of weird because it's like, as a guy who loves Vimerati and the mythology of Galaxy's Edge, the fact that me telling the app I can't ride Rise will give me a Vi mission, it's like, I'm glad I knew that, because I would prefer to help Vi than ride Rise again. Like that's just, there's nothing, they didn't do the alternate audio on Rise or anything like that. So there's not a, I understand that it ties into the story of Starcruiser, but it's like, if you've been on Rise a bunch, you know the story, like, you know why you're going down to do what you're doing. So I would say adding extra layers of decision trees in the data pad that let you do things around the ship in a slightly different way would be just a wonderful added little bonus. So yeah, those are the things that I would like to add. But honestly, at this point, I would preserve what's there and maintain the story that they're telling, at least for the next couple of years.
Well, I think that's really fascinating, because it brings up a point is, we've talked about, okay, they've got Galactic Starcruiser at Walt Disney World. Why can't they do it at Disneyland? And of course, Disneyland is a much smaller physical space. But if they don't have to get a transport from Starcruiser to Batuu, it could be anywhere in the adjoining property. And
I would be very curious. Yeah,
and we've heard from several people already that the physical component on Batuu wasn't something that was a highlight of the Galactic Starcruiser, because they've done it so many times.
Right.
So I as much as I thought that, you can't put it in Disneyland because you can't have an excursion to Batuu, I think I was wrong. I think you could absolutely have something that's purely based on the Halcyon.
Well, and don't underestimate the will. If there is if they think Starcruiser could make money in California, they'll find a way to get you to Batuu.
Of course.
Let's just say, when they built Galaxy's Edge, they rerouted a river.
Yes. Excellent point. That is where there's a will, there's a river that's going to be moved.
Right.
Sure. So, Nick, you've mentioned a couple of your experiences, but what were your favorite experiences on the Halcyon?
I have to go back to that second trip that was just, like I said, the quintessential Starcruiser trip, simply because we were being roped into so many things we didn't even plan to do. And honestly, it was to the point where other guests either thought we were plants or moles from Disney, or they were starting to feel a little resentful that we were getting so much attention. And honestly, I was not trying to do that. It was not even an attempt on our part to get, but my wife made a connection with Sammy. Mm-hmm. We made a connection with, unintentionally, Wraith and Gaia. I was really just focused on, let me tease out as much story as I can from these Saja, but from that comes so much. You can have a conversation with Lenka. You can have a conversation with Captain Kievan. And so for me, because I was so dead set on doing that Saja deep dive, which was, look, I know, by this point, I already knew better than to think it's a straight line. I know it's not a direct path. And now in retrospect, it really does seem like Saja opportunities are paired particularly well with resistance opportunities. Mm-hmm. And that final scene is kind of written to play on the idea that you've been helping the resistance. So I would even consider it kind of a sub path, or whatever, loath as I am to use the word path. It's something you do in combination with other things, right? Mm-hmm. But I knew that even with that in mind, I want to see as much of it as I can. And I knew particularly there was not just that finale with the holocron, now that we're in spoiler territories and I'm willing to say the word holocron, but there was another thing I knew the Saja had the opportunity to do, and it was for even less people than get to do that. And it was something that happens in the climate simulator, which I'm sure you may have seen videos from and whatnot. But that is something that really, it's at the sole discretion of the Saja to do. There is, oddly enough, a specific achievement badge associated with it in the Play Disney app.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's called
I didn't know that.
it's called the Saja Recruit. And it is the Saja logo, which to me is such a great bit of storytelling. I've really kind of adopted this area of interest for my own kind of Star Wars fandom post Starcruiser, because half the fun of going on Starcruiser is you've now experienced this exclusive story in the Star Wars universe, and there aren't actually that many fans that know what happens enough that you can talk to them like we're talking about what happened and spin theories. You know, ultimately to me, one of the most tantalizing mysteries of this, particularly with how Starcruiser dovetails with Rey's overall arc, is the tantalizing question: what is on that holocron? Meaning, we know it's something that Yoda says, do not let this fall into the wrong hands. It is knowledge of the Force in some way. But specifically, what is it? And this was my one question when I went up to the Imagineers at D23, and I said, do you have an answer to this? And the answer was, sure enough, we have something that has been documented that now lives with the story group, so that if 10, 20 years down the line, someone wants to write a story about it, they have the information they need to write a story about it.
So there isn't cool.
Wow.
That is so cool.
There is an answer. I have my own theories on what could be in that holocron specifically, but I think it's also kind of a blank slate for future Rey adventures, post Rise of Skywalker. It could be a setup for that film, or it could be interpreted as the next chapter in her research of the Force. And so that was something that was so interesting to me, how this story is in one way totally its own thing with these great new characters that we all fall in love with instantaneously. You love Sammy, you love Keevan, you love Lenkamunk, you love everyone. But you also have these legacy characters, and this has implications for that. Even if you consider the Falcon a character, what this does in retrospect for Galaxy's Edge, if Galaxy's Edge is a single repeating day, something we didn't know before Starcruiser, but we know now, every day you go to Galaxy's Edge is the last day the Falcon is on Batuu. Because Rey flies off in it the next day. So that's the type of thing I look for, is how can this give me a new interpretive lens on Star Wars as a Star Wars fan? And the Saja have been the heart of that for me, because the only little thing you can tease out of them in terms of story, and I'm sure they will reveal more as time goes on and people who are guests ask the right questions of them, but they are descendants of the Guardians of the Wills from the Kyber Temple on Jeddah. And now we have this upcoming new High Republic comic that is telling the story of Jeddah. Right. And I'm thinking, there's a lot of unexplained things. I know that's long before the Saja were formed, because the Saja would have had to have been formed after the destruction of the temple, and kind of the Guardians were scattered to the winds, and they decide to come back together. A lot of my lingering questions that I would love to ask the Saja when we go, and they might say, oh, that's too personal to talk about, meaning they don't have an answer for it. Right. And I always like to give the actors an out. I had a very, very specific question for Keevan the last time I was there. And I said, I understand if this is too classified for you to divulge to me. So I wanted to give her an out, meaning you don't have to answer this. But I wanted to know that booming voice of Watch, AJ-10, I think his name is, the voice of the bridge.
Yes.
I was like, is that a physical droid somewhere? Or is he like the, L3 on the Falcon with just the consciousness in the system? Like, does he have a body? Can he move around? And so I gave her that thing so she didn't have to answer it. But she very quickly came up with an answer, which was he does have a central processing core that can be moved from place to place, but he doesn't have a ambulatory body that can move around the ship, which is fascinating, because I really strongly think she came up with that in the moment, because there's an issue of the Halcyon comic series hadn't finished yet at that time. Right. There is an issue. I can't remember if it's 3 or 4. There's a single panel where Keevan is on the bridge, and there's a dialogue balloon that kind of looks like the ones that they do for Watch on the bridge, but it's coming out of a droid that looks a little bit like D309 in your cabin, but not completely. Like, it's a different head.
I remember the one you're talking about now. Yes.
I'm like, is that Watch? So I think maybe that actor just didn't know. I've been meaning to reach out to her and ask, do you think this is supposed to be Watch? And like, at one point he had a body,
That's great.
And that would have been one point a month before the cruise, right? Like, that's the difficult canon thing to square with this, is I'm still scratching my head a little bit and trying to figure out how a month before Starcruiser, which is in turn a month before Galaxy's Edge, Vi Moradi is on some planet at the end of the galaxy, which is what they reveal in the Halcyon comic book, even though in the other fiction, we've found that Vi Moradi has been on Batuu about a month in the terms of the Galaxy's Edge. And I'm like, oh man, did she have a pit stop? She must have had a pit stop on the other side of the galaxy. But why would she go to the other side of the galaxy? So it's the Galaxy's Edge story is compelling until you start doing math. And so I just highly recommend to people, do not start doing math. Just don't try that. You'll be perfectly fine. And going back to the Saja, where I would like to do some math and figure out some of those things. Their sort of ethos and their sort of respect for the Force as someone who doesn't necessarily wield it, but can find it in other people. There's something very personable about that to me that I can really relate to. And so, obviously, with all your fandoms, I think to myself, oh, wow, I love Starcruiser. Would I get a Starcruiser tattoo at some point? Because I have other fandom tattoos for things that I like. And I thought, well, I've seen some people get the Halcyon logo. That was interesting.
Sure.
I saw our mutual friend get the Wani tattoo. That was fantastic.
Yes, it was.
And then I said to myself, no, if I'm going to get one, it's going to be the Saja logo. And to bring it back around to why I started talking about this, the logo of the Saja kind of has the little lightsaber in the middle, like the Savi's logo, but it's got these kind of stepped wedges on the side. And I always like to do my due diligence before I consider getting a tattoo of any kind. So my only other Star Wars tattoo is I have the Royal Crest of Naboo on my forearm. And so I reached out to Ian McCaig, who designed the Naboo scripts for Phantom Menace. And I just wanted to make sure he was a good guy, not necessarily someone I didn't want tattooing stuff on my body, and asking him what was the inspiration for the letter forms for Naboo. And he gave me a really eloquent answer. So I felt confident, okay, there's not any bad fascist implications to this thing I'm getting. And I had a theory about the Saja logo that I confirmed with Anisha, who not only designed the datapad, but was the art director for all of the iconography that was used in Starcruiser. And while she did not directly design the logo, she confirmed to me that those wedges with the little steps, as my theory speculated, indicate the silhouette of the Kyber temple on Jeddah.
Oh,
it's actually, if you look at the building, that's what that looks like.
Yeah.
Which I think is just a fantastic way of visually reinforcing the story that they verbally tell you on the ship.
Yeah.
And so those are the little deep dives I like to do, which is to find the little story questions, which as of right now, the only way we have a way of getting an answer to them is by talking to the characters. How fun is that? We're all detectives trying to find out little aspects of this. And the one big one for me about the Saja is kind of, okay, so the Kyber Temple was destroyed. The Guardians were scattered to the winds. Who brought them together and who decided to call them Saja? And when did that happen? Like, was it right after? Was it 10 years after? How long have the Saja been there? Because in the other fiction we've got on the Halcyon, there aren't really Saja part of the story, and like the Princess and the Scoundrel and stuff. And so I'm like, they could be there, but on the margins. But I think to a certain degree, it's being non-committal because maybe at some point down the line, someone can tell that story. And that just seems to me such a rich one. It's just such a bizarre concept, which is, they are followers of the Force, but they have this corporate day job, right? Like their day job is to work for, which is another great thing. I don't know if you've noticed, but they've now given them name tags.
Oh,
so the Saja did not previously have Halcyon name tags, and now they do, which I think is a great sort of addition to that, especially because they all have individual names. Going back to the Legends of Frontierland thing, all the Saja have their own names, which are plays on their real world names. So it kind of reinforces, you can remember, how do you spell that Saja that I met? Oh yeah, I got this picture with them, that kind of thing. But no, I've just really, including, as you may have seen on my social feeds, I did a costume of the Saja for the Disney After Dark Star Wars night. I was going to say,
it looked spectacular. You did a very, very good job with that.
Thank you very much. It's a work in progress. I'm still trying to find some accurate fabrics, but
I got to. I want to see a Saja series on Disney Plus so bad right now. Like,
oh my God, there's so much you can do. I mean, that's the thing is if they caught wind of what was on that holocron and maybe have an inside kind of line on what that whole thing is, and just it's a really, needless to say, I was just especially someone who tried to do the Saja missions the first time, having successfully unlocked them by having what I was talking about before, what inspired this question was, what was my favorite thing? That experience that I had with the Saja in the climate simulator led to that Saja taking my wife and I to the ship's console and having us scan our M bands, which was what triggered us being able to get those Batuu missions the next day. But no, that that is something you can't plan for, but God, it is one of those things where, much like the Gaia monologue in the cargo hold about her homeland and just how emotional that is, the Saja have a monologue that they are able to kind of work with, but tailor to their own character for that experience. And they're just looking deep into your eyes, and they're talking about what it means to see you, to find someone that is sensitive to the Force, what it means for their ancestors, and how it affirms the legacy of their family. And there's just an emotionality to that each Saja can bring their own flavor to, which is fantastic. I mean, I just love that there's this original. It's not just that they're original characters, like Kevin is an original character. They're individual to the actor, and that is so magical. They're an original class of characters. They're not Jedi, they're Saja, but within that, each one can bring. You can ask a Saja where they were last stationed before the Halcyon. Oh, I was stationed on Naboo. I was doing some research on an artifact there. La da 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 da, and they'll have their own version of. And so that was what told me, okay, so the Saja don't just work on the Halcyon, they also work here, but they do research missions outside the ship.
Right.
And suddenly my mind now has this headcanon that it never would have if I hadn't asked that specific question.
Right, yes.
It just feels like the ultimate adventure game, where you're trying to plug in the right question to the text and all that and getting through the classic text parser adventure games, but you're doing it in person and it's intuitive. That to me, the intuitive part of this, where you can incorporate yourself into what you're doing on Starcruiser, is why, I saw an ad on Facebook recently. I like to save all the Facebook ads for Starcruiser. They've got a new series of them where it's just focusing on individual characters.
Oh, I hadn't seen
it's
that.
Like video ads.
Oh, wow.
And there's one where it's like, who will you be on the Halcyon? And then at the end, it gives you like a Star Wars name generator to choose a new name.
Oh, that's cool.
That's kind of cute and fun and all that. But and everyone is free to build their characters however they want. But I will say, for people who maybe aren't as keen to build out a whole backstory, they're actually, I highly recommend, if you don't have some other grand plan, which by all means do, I would highly recommend using your own name on Starcruiser for this one reason. There is something that bypasses the logical mind when a character looks you in the eyes and says your real name. It's primal. It completely short circuits your expectations, and it plays to something in your gut, which is certainly, obviously, we all know Starcruiser is fun no matter how you play. Like, they have an answer for everyone.
Right.
They'll call you whatever you want. But I've just found that, man, there is this thing that happens when you believe it. Like, and it's not like play believe, because we're all there to play and we're pretending. We're playing pretend. And that's what's so great about this. But when those moments can reach into you and go beyond play, it's like, this is the Joseph Campbell of it all. This is the hero's journey. This is the monomythic, and it's not even within that structure, because look, this is an ensemble story. The Joseph Campbell monomyth, that was not the only structure he described as a comparative mythologist. He described other structures. That was just the one that became very popular because it was kind of one of the early books he wrote. He went on to write all these other books like the Masks of God series. Other cultures had ensemble structures, which is why I really struggled, just as a general Star Wars fan, to step outside, Starcruiser for a second. I'm down, everyone's got their own taste. It's also individual. But when I hear people say the reason they don't like the Phantom Menace is because it doesn't have a main character, I'm like, who made you think there's only one way to tell a story on this earth? Mm-hmm. We embrace ensemble structures on television. We embrace structures of shared journeys among groups of people in other media. Why can't films reflect that as well? Phantom Menace structurally is not operating on that. So of course you're going to be disappointed if you're trying to take the template of some other story and place it on top of it. And that goes double for immersive experiences. There is no single protagonist in an immersive experience because the player is the protagonist of their story. And the structure of it is down to, look, we're providing this giant web of story. It interconnects. How you make your way through that web is your story and your main way of agency, which harkens back to traditional immersive theater, like something, I don't know if any of you have done Sleep No More in New York.
I'm dying to someday.
But there is no interactivity. But the proscenium has moved from watching a Broadway show on the stage. The proscenium is the eyes of the mask they give you to wear. Wow. So your only agency is choosing. There's 100 rooms on 5 levels. Which room will I go to? What will I see? on a smaller scale, I think Starcruiser is like that, where your story isn't just who am I talking to, who am I doing? What am I choosing to see? What room am I choosing to be in? Because when you're in the climate simulator, something's happening in engineering.
Right.
There is a simultaneity baked into this. That means your journey, that's what they mean when they say your journey honored, good journey to you. It's like, that's the structure of this, because it's not about what the data pad is unlocking. It's about what are you going to see and how is that string of things that you see unique to you specifically?
Mhm.
And I'll never get tired of that.
Yeah.
That's something I can go back and do 100 times, no matter if they change the story or not. You know, it's because the energy changes when you're in the room breathing the same air as the characters. That's a new reality, and you can't think about it the same way. Your human brain doesn't work like that. You're reinterpreting, you're comparing, you're
Right.
contrasting.
Yes.
You're looking for correlations, and that's why I really do imagine that, you know, some people would like for them to change the story sooner rather than later, but I don't think we've nearly scratched the surface of what kind of drop in the pond of Star Wars fandom this experience can represent. Because look, we can have this conversation, but I can't walk up to a random person at Star Wars Celebration and say, "What do you think is in Rey's holocron?"
Right.
You know, it's like they don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm just thrilled that the story group actually has an answer to what's on that holocron.
That's awesome.
Because I just kind of, in my head, again, spoiler alert, I was just kind of fearful that it was going to be a Jedi Fallen Order thing where it's just a MacGuffin.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Which
I
love.
Functionally, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, to a certain degree, it is. But they really bake in, particularly with how solemnly the Saja and Rey describe the secret, which is a great thing because it is absolutely impossible to enforce or encourage a guest to not tell someone they've seen it.
Yeah.
And it manifested in the most spectacular fashion on my second voyage, which was I'm finally seeing the scene. I'm like crying in the lightsaber training room.
Yes,
This is the best scene I've ever seen. This is my new favorite scene in Star Wars. And I'm just like, because particularly, and we haven't gone into this, but what Yoda says in the message that presumably precedes whatever knowledge is in the holocron is one of the greatest monologues in Star Wars, because it is the things Yoda is saying in this moment. And hopefully, you know, some of the people who are listening in the spoiler section will know what I'm talking about. There's a humility to the broken Yoda in this timeline. Whenever he recorded it, it's kind of ambiguous exactly when he recorded it.
We don't know, yeah.
But when he said something to the effect, I can't remember exactly, but he said something to the effect of, "Things I thought were legend, now I know are true." There's a whole new chapter of Yoda's life in that sentence.
Yep. Yes,
and it gives me goosebumps. It's like, that is beautiful storytelling. And within this limited window that they have to do it, which is just this little tiny message that he has to do. So we do this experience. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Like, keep the secret of the holocron, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it was in one of the unlockable scenes for the sub finales that my wife and I were doing. We see, I can't even remember what character it was to. It could have been Croy, could have been Chewbacca, but this little old mother, maybe a grandmother who's with her family, walks up to the character and says, "I was with Yoda. He came out of a box." Just to her,
Right.
to her it was magic. And she just had to tell somebody.
Oh,
So she
that's
told
fabulous.
the first character that she saw,
Oh,
you know,
that's
and
great.
that's just, it sets up moments like that, you know. And another thing I recommend to people who are going a second time, and particularly people going in a group like you, depending on the level of engagement, like I said, sometimes I'll just invite people in to those scenes if they're not fully booked, right? If if not enough people ran the Batuu missions to get invited to them, right? And so ultimately, if you all do different paths and get different invitations to different sub finales, if they don't overlap, you just go to the door and say, "Can my wife join me?"
Right.
And every single time we asked on our trip, they said yes. So my wife and I both got to see double the sub finales.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I just loved seeing some of the things that particularly I said in my first kind of trip report, where I was like, here's where I think things went wrong, but I'm not quite sure. Seeing what I think were the results of that, because, you know, having been on Legends of Frontierland so much, you got to know some of the actors. And one of the actors who played a character called Miss Priscilla in Legends of Frontierland became one of the 5 immersive directors on Starcruiser, meaning
wow.
the people
Cool.
people who literally are on site. There's one person on site during each excursion to guide things along and make decisions and help the actors and stuff like that. And so she comes up to me at that second trip, maybe after the first night, when there's no story happening, and she felt like she could come out because they walk around in plain clothes. If you know who they are, you'll see them every cruise.
Oh, wow.
There's one of them every cruise. But she said to me, we talk about you in meetings, right? And sure enough, one of the things I kind of said was, look, there's this gap sometimes, depending on how things shake out. It's so complex. There can be a gap between what's happening in your data pad and what just verbal invitations you're getting from a character. And sometimes they talk to each other and sometimes they don't. So it's like you might get a verbal invitation from Wraith, for example, after the heist is over and you've I'm the ultimate scoundrel. I need you to help me on the bridge at this time. Right.
Okay,
but you may have already unlocked a bridge scene, because ideally you're supposed to get a bridge scene at the end and one other thing, either in the training room or in the engineering, right? Depending on which side, which faction you're with. And in my mind, it was like, so I, of course, if a character asked me, I'm going to go do it. This was on my first trip. And it just really felt like, even though there was technically different story things happening on the bridge, I went to the one with Wraith and then I went to the one on my data pad, because why wouldn't I? And I just distinctly got this feeling I wasn't supposed to be there. You know what I mean? Even if technically it doesn't really matter, but I was like, oh no, the Blue Squadron is showing up again. Like, even though I'm helping a different character and I'm doing a different thing, like, you're not supposed to see Blue Squadron show up twice, right? Like, this is not correct. And so sure enough, when my wife started getting us roped into Sammy's stuff, where he's like asking her to hold Gaia's bag, right? Like, the coaxium is in Gaia's bag. We need you to carry it. And I just got the cutest picture of her holding this bag. And just like, I don't want it to blow up. When he's like, I need you to come with me, but I have to go do something on the bridge. When we're done on the bridge, this was the second trip, he said, you can stay on the bridge if you want. You might do something similar to what we did before, or do you want to come help me in engineering? So of course we went and helped him with engineering, but that was a small adjustment where it was like, he gave us a verbal invitation, but he told us the ramifications of that. Like, you might see something you've already seen. And that, to me, in that moment, felt like, did I help with this? Did I?
That's great. Oh, that's great.
Was this the result of me getting really confused the second time I was in that bridge?
That's awesome.
But I just love that it's like, yes, you have a plan, you have a data pad, you have an itinerary, but a character can rope you in whenever, and we just kept getting invited to things, whether it was with him, with Lenka, because my wife originally became so close with Lenka, she thought, I'm just going to stick to her like glue the whole time. But all these other characters started, Sammy and all these other things. And then when Sammy takes us down to engineering with the coaxium in the bag, he's like, it's his sub-finale scene. So he has to assign other guests who unlocked that to their stations. And he's like, who haven't I assigned yet? And there's 2 or 3 groups that haven't been assigned. And my wife and I raise our hand. We don't have an assignment yet. And he looks and he says, no, I've got something special for you guys. And I'm like, no, we've already had enough special things. He's like, you're going to help Chewie. And so we're at the station where you're passing back the hydro spanner, and Chewie is giving us a hydro spanner. And it's just like, we're in the middle of it. And my wife and I stop and look at each other. We're like, can you believe this is happening? Like, because in that moment, it feels real, because what you're doing in a gameplay sense matches what's actually happening, which is my spirit kind of floated out of my body. And I was like, I'm helping Chewie in engineering. And I'm actually doing it. We're actually passing a tool, because if we don't do it, this thing needs to happen, right? Like, someone needs to perform this, and we're the ones doing it with Chewie. And I'm just like, how could this exist? How is it even possible to think of all the things that needed to happen for this moment to exist? And it's just, that is pure magic. That is the type of magic that can only happen there. And it's happening all over the ship constantly, whether someone's asking you to sit down in the bar, or someone's saying, hey, come help me hide as we hide SK as we get him off the atrium. It's all these little things there, and you can never predict it, because it's based on people. Mm-hmm, it's based on physical actor performances and having that connection. And so the only piece of advice I give to anyone about Starcruiser is make a connection with a character, and don't plan it. Like, really though, That muster scene is so well designed that at the end of it, you know everyone's faction. You know who's resistance. You know who's hiding things. You know all these different things. Use that gut instinct to say, who should I talk to? And then even beyond that, it's happenstance. Who am I in the hallway with? Who am I, not in the atrium with? It's a huge cascading cause and effect. And there's very little that you control, but you can completely control how you ride that wave, right? Like you're a surfer, you're riding the wave of the story. And man, just talking about it, I'm like, God, I wish I could go back.
Yeah, I know.
Oh my God, how long till October?
Yeah.
We gotta go.
Gotta go tomorrow. So Nick, if you had to pick one character, you have to pick one. You can't pick like the Saja, that's a group. But if you had to pick one
and that would just be
character-
cheating in general, obviously.
Right, exactly. But who would you say your favorite character was on the Halcyon?
Man, it's really hard because, like I said, so quickly you fall in love with all of them. Like I could easily see any one of them becoming a new favorite character for somebody. Like, I want storytelling from all of them. I really want to see the continuation of all of that. And even though there are characters I had a real connection with, the one I would probably want to see the most, weirdly enough, is Sammy. I would love to see Sammy crop up in even traditional Star Wars live action content. My dream, because here's the thing. You walk down below decks and you see Sammy hanging out with Rey. And in my head, I'm just like, well, they should kiss.
yeah. You got a ship going here.
So I ship Raimi. That is my Starcruiser ship.
Raimi.
So I would just love if, like, in 20 years when they finally do episode 10 or whatever in the new trilogy, and it's Rey and she started her school, she goes into her little hut, and without explaining who he is, there's just Sammy there cooking.
Oh my God!
Don't even explain it.
Nice, that's great.
So I would say probably Sammy, but even just saying it out loud, you're helping me figure this out live on air. Actually, it feels like a betrayal of Sandro. Like, honestly, I spent so much time with Sandro, and I personally kind of relate to the guy. So yeah, okay, forget it. Even though I want to see more stories from other characters, my favorite is Sandro. I'm putting it down right there. I think that guy, and I just shared so many moments with him, unexpected moments, and just singing for Gaia when she arrives. And on that note of my Sandro experiences that make him my favorite character, I will give one final tip to anybody who, this would probably only apply to people returning, because I really don't think you should strategize too hard on your first trip. But if you are kind of curious and you find yourself, look, I'm at the end of the second day. The big finale hasn't happened yet, but I've done my sub finale. I'm just kind of waiting around for that red alert to happen, right? There's no bad place to be on the ship when that red alert happens, but I will say this. My wife said, why don't we just go down to the climate simulator? Why not? And I was just like, okay, whatever. I don't think anything's going to happen. No. Every character who's not doing something else uses the climate simulator as a staging area before the red alert.
Wow.
So I walked in, and there's Sandro tuning his guitar. There's Asaja sitting meditating. Oh, who's coming in? Sammy. He wants to give me another monologue. It's just hit by hit by hit. And then to see the red alert lights go on in the climate simulator, I was like, I looked at my wife, I said, Britt, you're a Starcruiser genius.
That's great. Oh, that's
so
awesome.
I particularly on my second trip, I posted this picture of Sandro playing his thing with Asaja sitting in the back in the climate simulator. That is from that moment. And I was just like, I can't believe I'm even taking this picture. This is unbelievable. So yeah, if you're just kind of wandering the halls, maybe consider the climate simulator before the red alert.
Nice. That's
Noted.
good.
Well, Nick, I'm going to ask something purely selfishly for myself, because we've got our second voyage coming up. And as someone who's been on the second voyage, something, I'm sure you'll understand where this is coming from, but I've got this terrible feeling that I'm going to go the same path I did before, because I don't want to betray Wraith and Gaia. There's going to be a moment where I have this moral dilemma that if I don't click this button on the data pad, I'm going to betray Wraith and Gaia. How do you get around that?
I think okay, so first of all, statistically, I think it's very unlikely you will see many of the same things. So I don't think you have to worry too much. But if you're talking about that, if I'm thinking about the specific moments that it surfaces those moral questions, depending on what else you're doing, you might not even get asked. Like unless you've committed to like going hardcore first order,
Right.
And if you have, great. But it's like, man, you're gonna have to role play. It's like that's kind of the only thing you can do. But in terms of the other things, you actually might not be asked those questions. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. And honestly, allow those moments when they surface to be like a self-reflective moment. like allow your go inside yourself and say, I just need a minute to think about what button I'm gonna press right now.
That's so great. Oh,
I'm going to think about you in that moment.
Gosh, guys, I am so excited to hear about the results of your second trip. I am so eager to hear what goes down.
We have big plans.
Yes, we do.
well, a lot of drinking because I do want to have more of the cocktails.
Yeah,
that's for
we did
sure.
not
Well, and they've got that new 4-person cocktail.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Of course,
reactor.
It just happens to be 4 adults going, so
we'll be
there
in
you
good
go.
shape. Well, Nick, if people wanted to find you on the web, where could they do so?
The best place people can find me is probably on Twitter. I'm at Nicky T, NICKYTEA. And the big thing you'll see me posting about over the next couple weeks is the Hollow Medium project that I'm doing, which is a audio drama ghost story that is being released. It's kind of the audio equivalent of a found footage movie. It's old wax cylinders from 1926 that a woman tried to use to record the supernatural occurrences happening around her. And each Sunday leading up to that release, we're doing a little bit of a story drop. And there's a lot of digital assets that build out the world of this woman's life. And there's a little layer for people to peel back each week, both now through the release and then actually with each episode of the show. So if you want to hear me see me post about Hollow Medium, do it on Twitter.
Well, thank you so much to Nick Tierce. What an absolutely fascinating conversation. I mean, my mind is blown with these different possibilities he's kind of put out about, how Starcruiser came about, how it operates, where it could go. Just this whole history of Disney's immersive storytelling.
Yeah, and for people who are listening to the episode, if you hear long periods of time where it's just Nick talking, it's literally because we forgot that we were going to ask a next question because we were just so enraptured by everything he had to say. That was just one of the most fun conversations about Starcruiser I've ever had.
Boy, I think we've been out Starcruiser superfanned.
I think so. I think so. Well, Christine, if people want to find us on the interweb, how would they do so?
You can find us on Twitter at Halcyon_heroes, on Instagram at Heroes of the Halcyon, on our new website at heroesofthehalcyon.com, or you can always email us at heroesofthehalcyon@gmail.com.
We've actually gotten some really fun viewer mail just saying how much they liked this podcast. And that's always a lot of fun to read from folks, that you're liking the love for this project that we're sending out. So
it is absolutely, every time I see those emails, it really, we don't make any money doing this, but just having an effect on some people is just super cool, much like the effect that Nick had on us.
Yes.
Well, it's always fun to shoot the poodoo with all the Starcruiser super fans out there. So until next episode, it's our honor. Let's raise our glasses with the Halcyon toast. Tabuite!